Hi, I'm Carl Weber. Welcome to Video Aided Instructions English Grammar Series. This is the Parts of Speech program. Think of a sentence as a kind of machine, a machine for communicating ideas. The machine is made out of parts that are called words. Now, if you were an auto mechanic, you'd have to know about the different kinds of parts that go to make up a car: the transmission, the carburetor, the ignition, the radiator, and so on. A car has to contain the right parts, properly installed and well maintained if it's to run. In the same way, a person who wants to communicate effectively must understand the different kinds of words that go to make up a sentence. These different kinds of words are called parts of speech. If you understand the parts of speech and how they fit together to make up a sentence, you'll understand how words are assembled to create sentences, and you'll be able to do so correctly and effectively. In this program, we're going to go through each of the different parts of speech and see how they work together to form English sentences. There are 9 different parts of speech in English. That is, 9 different kinds of words that are used in creating sentences. In this first lesson, we'll talk about 3 of the parts of speech: verbs, nouns, and pronouns. Let's begin with verbs. As you recall, every sentence in English can be divided into 2 main parts: the subject and the predicate. The subject is what the sentence is about. The predicate tells something that the subject is or does. And within the predicate, the single most important word is the verb. A verb expresses action done by or to the subject, or it expresses a state of being of the subject. As you can see, the verb is always closely related to the subject. It tells either what the subject is or what the subject does. As you can imagine, there are many different kinds of verbs, because verbs express all kinds of actions, activities, or states of being on the part of the subject. Here are some examples of typical verbs: go, decorate, believe, is, appears. Let's look at each of these examples. Perhaps you can come up with a sentence in which each of these words would be used as a verb. Let's start with the first one, go. Can you come up with a sentence that uses the verb go? How about this one? I go to school every day. Here, the verb go is expressing an action being done by the subject, I. It tells something that I, the subject, do. How about our second example, decorate? Can you come up with a sentence including that verb? Here's one. Every spring, we decorate the gym for our annual dance. Here, the verb decorate expresses an action being done by the subject, we. It tells something that we do. We decorate. How about the verb believe? I believe it's going to rain today. Here, the verb believe is expressing an action being done by the subject, I. Notice that in this case, the action is completely internal. It's a mental action, which means it's something that other people can't see happening. Nonetheless, it is an action. So the verb believe is expressing an action in that sentence. How about the verb is? Can you come up with a sentence that uses the verb is? The weather is cloudy today. Here, the verb is linked with the subject weather. Is it expressing an action or a state of being? The verb is expresses a state of being. It isn't telling us something that the weather is doing. Instead, it's telling us something that the weather is. It is cloudy today. How about our last example, appears? Is this verb a verb that expresses an action or a state of being? Well, the verb appears is an interesting example because it can do either one. In some sentences, the verb appears expresses an action. In other sentences, it expresses a state of being. Let's consider a couple of examples. Susan appears on television as a singer. In that sentence, the verb appears is expressing an action being done by the subject, Susan. It tells us something that Susan does. She appears on television. In that sentence, therefore, appears expresses an action. In other sentences, however, appears might express a state of being. For example, the weather appears cloudy. In that sentence, the verb appears is expressing a state of being. It is telling us something that the weather is, not something the weather is doing. When we say the weather appears cloudy, we mean more or less the same as the weather is cloudy. So a verb like appears can be either a verb expressing an action or a state of being. And there are a few verbs like that in English which can go either way. They can express a state of being or an action. Notice one other thing about verbs. Verbs may contain more than one word. When a verb consists of two or more words, it's called a verb phrase, and it's made up of a main verb and one or more helping verbs. Here are a few examples of verb phrases. Had gone, will decorate, must believe, should have been, and may appear. In each of these phrases, the main verb comes last, and one or more helping verbs have been added on to modify or give further meaning to the main verb. And in each case, the helping verbs somewhat change the meaning of the main verb. For example, they may change the time in which the action is occurring. Take, for example, the verb phrase, will decorate. When I say, we decorate the gym every year, we're talking about something that's happening now. But when we say, we will decorate the gym next year, we're talking about something happening in the future. So the helping verb, will, changes the meaning of the main verb by expressing a particular time when the event will take place. When verbs are modified or changed in this way to influence or to express the time when the action will take place, then we're talking about creating different verb tenses. Verb tenses are used to express the time when an action or a state of being takes place. The whole subject of verb tenses and of properly using verbs is fairly complicated. In fact, it's so complicated that we've devoted an entire program to that subject. And if you're interested in learning more about how to use verbs properly, we recommend you watch that program. Let's move on to the second important part of speech, nouns. A noun names a person, a place, a thing, or an idea. Here are some examples of nouns. Student, Barbara, state, Cleveland, sofa, freedom. All of these are nouns because they name a person, a place, a thing, or an idea. Let's look at each example. What about student? What does that name? Well, that names a person, or at least a kind of person. How about Barbara? That names a person, and it names a specific person. We'll talk in a moment about the special kind of noun that Barbara represents. What about state? What does that name? Well, that names a place. A state would be one of the 50 states that goes to make up the United States, and it's a place where you might live. Cleveland also names a place. Again, a very specific place, a particular city within the United States. Sofa names a thing, and freedom names an idea. Sofa and freedom are both nouns, but notice that one of them names something that you can lay your hands on, something that you can see, something that you can perceive with your senses. That's sofa. Freedom, however, names something that's much more difficult to grasp. It's not something you can see with your eyes or touch with your hands. Freedom is an idea. It's an important concept that many people think about a lot, but it's not something you can point to or perceive with your senses. And that's another example of a kind of noun, a noun that names an idea. Now, within the broad category of nouns, there are two particular types of nouns that you need to be aware of. These are a common noun and a proper noun. A common noun names a category of people, places, things, or ideas. A proper noun names a specific example.